welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. As local elections unfold in Georgia, the political climate remains deeply polarized. The ruling Georgian Dream party faces mounting pressure from domestic protests and growing international scrutiny, while opposition groups, including that like United Nations movement, challenge the integrity of the democratic process. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack the significance of this vote is George Melashvili, president of Europe-Georgia Institute. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening, and thank you for the invitation.
So first, can you help us set the stage? What's at stake in these local elections politically, symbolically, and both for the opposition party as well as the Georgian government?
So Georgian politics is an extremely complicated way of dealing with politics in general, and this election is definitely not an exception. So originally, we had two big camps regarding the elections, a camp comprising of Lelo and Party for Georgia, the parties that actually participate in it, and also the second camp, United National Movement and Coalition for Georgia, the two parties that boycotted local election because they believed that the previous parliamentary elections that happened almost a year ago was fraudulent, was extremely corrupt in lots of ways, and also that there have been lots of problems with the election process in general. Following the October election, Georgian Dream, which is the ruling party in Georgia at this moment, they adopted a lot of extremely undemocratic, in some ways anti-Western laws that make normal observation of election almost impossible. Also, shortly as a continuation of their assault on civil society, the Georgian Dream froze bank accounts of ISFAD, Georgia's oldest and most respected election observer. Georgian Dream did not invite OSCE or DIR to observe the elections, and they utilized Lukashenko's trick by inviting these international observers just a couple of weeks before the election, knowing very well that they need much more time to prepare an observation mission and so on and so forth. So they did not invite OSCE or DIR, they froze bank accounts of ISFAD, and they had a bunch of gongos that were government-organized, non-government organizations that kind of observed the election. And they also had a couple of international observers from people like Orban, so absolutely no respect to democratic procedures or process. Also, currently in Georgia, we have dozens of political prisoners, including leaders of opposition parties. For example, all four leaders of Coalition for Change are currently in jail. Leader of For Georgia party, Georgi Gahare, is currently in Germany in political exile. Leaders of Lelo, they were arrested and released just before the election. And also, other parties, for example, United National Movement, also has lots of their leaders and activists arrested as well. So pre-election environment was a very big mess in general, and also the decision of opposition parties to have different strategies, two opposition parties to boycott the election, two opposition parties to participate, also added to the confusion in general. So that's very briefly about the local election.
Right, definitely a lot to unpack here. But one of the things that you mentioned is like the very undemocratic way that these elections are being conducted. And personally, as a litmus test when it comes to whether or not these government or the protesters have a validity in their concern, usually I take a look at how transparency is being treated. And well, just in our own experience, our correspondent have been mazed just a couple of hours ago on the ground trying to cover some of the protests and on some of the ways that the government is trying to crack down on these protesters. Being a bystander kind of on the Way's side, he personally got essentially assaulted by the Georgian law enforcement as well. So yeah, we are seeing some very dire situation over there. But at this point, do you think that these protests will escalate into something even more dramatic, or do you think that the government will use more force to try to quell that?
Well, I'm not surprised to hear this report, to be honest, because that's not the first time the Georgian Dream police and special forces have been assaulting journalists. During the last year's protest, we had several extremely violent cases, including when one of the journalists was dropped on the ground, and it was just a miracle that his neck did not broke and that he survived it. It was Guram Rogava, and we have a bunch of other similar cases. So extreme violence against journalists is unfortunately a trait of Georgian Dream special forces. On the other hand, we have 310 days of peaceful protest after the parliamentary election, and the regime is extremely desperate to discredit the protests in all the ways it can, because it is a grassroots protest, it is a protest which is very deeply entwined into the Georgian nation. And for 310 days, Georgians have been protesting peacefully for democracy and for Europe. There has been no violence, no destruction, and the response from the regime is a purely USSR, Soviet-style repression and lots of disinformation. So that's why the regime is trying to fabricate chaos to justify crackdown. And that's why they have been always trying to create lots of false anti-Western narratives that have been megaphoned by the propaganda news outlets loyal to the regime. So that's what we have been witnessing. Today, there was also an attempt to provoke the protesters, but most of the protests remained peaceful, which is very important and also crucial because it demonstrates how highly the Georgians perceive and try to sustain both our statehood and also the preciousness of the Georgian democracy, which is being assaulted by the Georgian Dream. So from this perspective, when it comes to the possible developments of the protest, it can be both. It can be a huge protest tomorrow, or it can be a small pause before another big protest. We often hear that the protests are somehow going down and then going up. In reality, the protest exists, it is evolving, and it is definitely not disappearing. So the Georgians are protesting for European Union, the Georgians are protesting for democracy and for the basic human rights as well, because when government is responsible, that is something that every nation deserves.
Now, the ruling party argues that opposition boycotts and protests are, quote, undermining stability. How do you respond to that narrative?
Stability has been quite often used in Georgian politics. Even Eduard Shevardnadze, the president from the 90s and 2003, he also was using stability as a main propaganda narrative. So that's just a narrative which is unbased. If somebody or anybody is undermining stability in the country, it's definitely Georgian Dream, which is utilizing all the lessons from authoritarian and even totalitarian playbook to suppress civil society, to suppress political parties, and also to consolidate one-party rule. Because right now, in Georgian parliament, there is only one party. The Georgian Dream has control over judiciary, and this is not just a basic political control. It is a clan which is actually controlling and making all the decisions in favor of the Georgian Dream party. And now they also consolidated their rule when it came to the local municipalities. So there is a total one-party rule, very similar to the authoritarian regimes in other authoritarian countries.
All right, so at this point, if election is not a solution, how should political power be contested in Georgia? Do you see any point or any cracks in which these opposition parties or anyone with a different set of opinion than that of a government can ever voice their concerns?
I have been a long time advocating for a political unity of the opposition spectrum, because I believe that it's the only way that we can actually achieve any possible developments. And so far, one of the reasons why Georgian Dream has been able to sustain its power is because of the disunity amongst the opposition players. So I'm hoping that after this election, after today's events at night, we shall see consolidated opposition that shall be able to give Georgian Dream a decent fight. Also, the main demand of the protest has always been new and fair elections. That's something that we have been demanding in Georgia, that the Georgian citizens have been demanding, and that is one of the two main demands. The second one is release of all political prisoners, which, as I have already mentioned, we have dozens of. So these are the two main demands, and the protests will definitely continue. They might evolve, they might change, but the protest is not disappearing, and the Georgians are fighting for European and democratic future.
Do you think at this point there's any possibility or room for institutional dialogue between the opposition and the government, or is that window pretty much just closed?
Well, the opposition has always been open to dialogue. It is Georgian Dream that has been denying any possibilities of dialogue and that has been adopting anti-Western laws, anti-democratic laws, and also pursuing lots of anti-Western rhetorics. If Georgian Dream decides to talk to its own people and to actually implement the demand of Georgian society to continue integration with the European Union, in that case, I believe there is a lot of space for institutional discussions, but it has to happen after free and fair elections that opposition will also consider free and fair.
Right. So I think the key is the free and fair election right now, but that's also the sticking point where the Georgian Dream Party seems to be kind of very hard on not delivering. Do you think there's any international partners or international community that can put enough pressure on the Georgian Dream or in Georgia as a whole to return the free and fair election?
We're already very grateful to our Western partners for the assistance that has been provided to Georgian democracy throughout the years, but I absolutely agree with you that there is a space both for the European Union and the United States to implement more pressure on the Georgian Dream and ensure that this government actually follows the will of the Georgian people. There is a lot of pressure from the inside, and if our partners and friends help us with additional pressure from the outside, that will, of course, help Georgia and Georgian people to actually achieve democratic development.
Do you think there's any particular, be it politician, be it countries, be it organizations, that could be more effectively reached out to that actually have a substantial voice in changing the trajectory of how the Georgian Dream operates, or at least, again, going back to the possibility of returning a free and fair election?
For example, the United Kingdom has a lot of leverage when it comes to the Georgian Dream because majority of their assets is located in British jurisdictions. Also, European Union as a whole can help Georgian people by taking more proactive measures against propaganda megaphones of the Georgian Dream, and we know that European Union has begun discussing possible sanctions against Georgian propaganda megaphones as a part of deterring Russian influence, and that's absolutely correct, right way to deal with those because they are just parroting Russian narratives and also utilizing their access to European institutions, to Europe as a whole, to gaslight the Georgian public. And this gaslighting by media is one of the reasons how Georgian Dream is still able to keep themselves in power, and I believe that you perfectly knows how strong and important media is and how powerful media can be when it comes to propaganda, unfortunately.
All right, thank you so much for your input and insight. Of course, we'll have to see how this develops overnight, but in the meantime, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.